Welcome to myFace, myStory, voices from the craniofacial community, with your host, Dina Zuckerberg.
Hello, and welcome to myFace, myStory, voices from the craniofacial community. Whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on Apple Podcasts, click subscribe now so you'll never miss a future episode. And if you're a fan of myFace, myStory, rate and review the program on Apple Podcasts so we can get our message of inclusivity and empowerment to more people. I'm your host, Dina Zuckerberg, the Director of Family Programs at myFace. I was born with a cleft lip, a hearing loss, and no vision in my left eye. myFace, myStory is about people like us being seen and heard, about sharing stories within the craniofacial community and with others. Today, I will be joined by Dorsey Ross. Dorsey was born with an Apert Syndrome. Doctors gave Dorsey's parents no hope for his survival and advised them to put him into an institution. Throughout his life, Dorsey has had to overcome a lot of obstacles and trials, being bullied and undergoing multiple surgeries. He and his parents always had faith that he would surpass the doctor's predictions and go on to do great things. Teachers told Dorsey he would not make it in college, and with all odds against him, he entered Queensborough Community College. After 4 years there and after attaining an associate's degree, he entered the University of Valley Forge. After years of hard work and perseverance, he graduated with a bachelor's degree in youth ministry. His life saying is, "Can't is not in my vocabulary." Welcome, Dorsey.
Thank you, Dina, for having me. I appreciate it.
Yes, I look forward to our conversation today. So can you share with our audience about Apert syndrome and what are the characteristics? How rare is it?
I believe I've heard different numbers as far as the rarity of it. I've heard 1 in 80,000 births, and I also heard it can go up to 160,000 births as well. So I'm not sure exactly the specific number, but it's somewhere in that, probably somewhere in that range.
Okay.
And I probably would say, maybe the more known it gets, the lower the number is.
Right.
That's also a possibility as well. The characteristics of it is that when I was born, and when most people with Apert syndrome are born, the forehead is pushed outward, the eyes and nose are pushed back into the forehead, and the fingers and toes are fused together, meaning they had no individual movement of them. And also with me, my skull was fused together and or was closed. And usually when you're born with a sore spot and or opening in the skull to allow the brain to grow and allow it to function normally. I did not have that, and I believe that's a characteristic of most people with Apert syndrome, and that's one of the reasons why the doctors had told my parents that I would become brain dead, because if you have no room for your brain to grow, eventually it's going to bang against the skull, or hit against the skull, and eventually the brain will, the skull and whatnot, it will damage, the brain and damage the learning, senses and whatnot, going against that. So that's why the doctor said, the best option for my parent would be to put him into a institution and to let him be. And thankfully, my parents didn't do that. Their faith and whatnot told them, "Hey, you can't do that. Take him home, take him to another hospital, and see what will happen." And I was born in New York. I was born in Queens, and they took me to a hospital in the Bronx in Columbia, Presbyterian hospital there, and the doctor there said, well, we can operate, we can, open the skull to relieve the pressure on his brain, and um, you know, that will, allow him to grow and allow him to live. We don't know how long he'll live, or we don't know how long he'll survive for, but he'll have obstacles, and he'll have difficulties he'll have to overcome, but he'll survive.
Well, I think those doctors that said that you should be institutionalized got that wrong.
Yeah,
So
obviously.
yes. I remember hearing my parents telling me that they took me to a neurologist when I was little because I wasn't responding. I guess because I had a hearing loss and I had no vision in my left eye. And they said that I would never be able to walk, talk, ride a bicycle, all those things. And again, they clearly got that wrong too.
Yeah.
So what was it like for you growing up?
It was difficult. I think obviously with most people with, conformity of the face and physical disability with the face, it's difficult for most of us, I would say, because people will, like myself, people would look at me funny and would make fun of me and would call me names like monster and freak, and will point at me, and different things of that nature, and I would have to um, you know learn to adjust to that and learn to just deal with that, and it was hard to learn to deal with that. And I was, thankfully I was able to, when I went to church, I was able to find, the youth and find friends in the youth group that I was able to, um, you know, make friends with, and be able to be accepted and be able to, feel loved in that group. And I went to a school on Long Island.
Mm-hmm.
I went to a school for people with disabilities called the Henry Viscardi School, and even in that school, there was, even though, 100% of the students were people with disabilities, you would still, notice that people would bully one another, and people would bully me, and, make fun of me. And, you wouldn't think that that would happen in such you know, a close knit, society or close knit school, but unfortunately, it did, and that was even the school where the teacher, when I was graduating high school, the teacher said, "Well, no, we don't think that Dorsey will be able to make it in college," you know. And I agree. I had struggled with school. I didn't do well in certain tests and certain classes and whatnot, being able to learn and being able to memorize things of that nature. But my parents, thankfully, they always allowed me to, figure out for myself what I could and could not do. And, couldn't wasn't very much for me. Like you said, Dina, earlier that, you rode a bike, the doctors didn't think you would be able to ride a bike. Well, I'm, even with, my fingers the way they are, and I only have 9 fingers as it is, I'm able to, I was able to ride a bike. I was able to go, sleigh riding down the hills and in the golf courses when it snowed and in the middle of the winter time. I was able to play baseball and play football in the middle of the street, with my friends who were non-disabled, and so when people put limitations on us, sometimes I think it's sometimes they don't realize what they're doing to us, because we don't, a lot of us, we don't have limitations. We don't.
Right.
I think the limitations that we have on ourselves, we put on ourselves.
Right. And I think society sometimes makes assumptions because you look different or
Right.
that you are not capable of doing certain things that you
Absolutely.
and I think that feeds into it too. And I think luckily for you and for me, we had parents that took that information and said, but no, I'm going to give my child every opportunity to show the world that you are capable of doing anything that you want to do, that you may have challenges, but you can excel in whatever that means for you.
Right.
So you have had more than 65 surgeries from when you were just a baby into your adult years. What is giving you that strength to endure so many medical procedures? If,
I, I think, first of all, again, it was my parents. You know, my parents were always there to support me and to encourage me and to be there with me. My mom, again, she would, be there to, give me the faith to know that God was going to be there with me and to pray with me before going into the operating room. And if I needed to, I was really upset and really, nervous about going, for a specific operation. She would even walk into the operating room with me. And I remember the one time the doctor or the anesthesiologist said to my mom, and this was back, 30, 35 years ago when they weren't even doing the needles yet. They were doing the face mask to put
right,
you to sleep. And they and the anesthesiologist said to my mom, hold this above his head to, try to calm him down. And I was like, wait, you're the doctor, you're supposed to be doing that,
right. That's funny.
But and as far as I know, I never had any, setbacks or any,
Right.
problems during the operations, any serious medical, problems during the operations. All of them, came out fine. And I mean, there was a couple of times where, as I got older, I went to NYU Medical Center to see the um, see the doctors there, and there was a couple of times with a nose and mouth operation where they said, well, you know, this needs to be open a little bit more,
Right.
and I think that was one of the only times that I got really frustrated because I had to go back like 2 or 3 times and like a certain amount of time. I was like, oh no, not again. Come on,
Right.
guys, get it right this time.
Right. So I've been listening to you talk about how your parents, it seems like they were your biggest champions and taught you to believe that you could do whatever you wanted despite what others were saying. I'm wondering, what advice do you have for other parents who are just starting the journey and wanting to do the same for their children?
Yeah, I would just tell them, just don't obviously don't put limitations on your kids. Don't don't listen to the doctors on what they tell you that your children or your son and daughter is not going to be able to do. Don't obviously don't definitely don't listen to the teachers. I mean, yes, they know what they're talking about, but at the same time, the teacher told me, hey, he's not going to be able to make it in college. And 9 years later, I was able to come out with 2 associate's degrees and a bachelor's degree as well. So I really put as much emphasis on what your child can do instead of what your child can't do as well.
So, do people ask about your difference even now? And if so, how do you respond? Or how do you prefer that people ask about your difference?
They don't usually ask me, what is your, what is your disability or how does that affect you? Some people do. I mean, I don't mind them ask. I'd rather have them people ask me, then people stare and wonder, you know, why does he look like that, or what is he, what is the issue that he has?
Right.
I remember people even telling me a long time ago that people would people can sometimes possibly look at me and think he could have been maybe in the fire or in a
Mm,
car accident or or something of that nature, and not even realize that it's a birth defect.
right. That's why education is important, right?
Right, absolutely.
So you have written a book, Overcomer, Discovering God's Purpose Against All Odds, based on your life. What motivated you to write it, and what are some of its key messages?
I would say, one of the reasons why I wrote it was because so many people kept asking me, when you gonna write a book? When you gonna write a
Mm,
book? When you gonna write a book? So probably back in 2014, probably about 2014. It took me a few years to write it. Um, I started sitting down and writing it, and I got it published in 2016, and then I republished it again in 2020. Good friend of mine pointed out that I had a lot of, grammatical errors in it and
mm,
spelling errors in it. So I got it, republished with someone that I knew and I trusted, that I knew would do a better, possibly a better job with it. And I would say, don't, one of the, in my opinion, one of the biggest, stories in it is not to give up.
it's a great message. I love the word that you use in your title, Overcomer. So, what inspires you to become an ordained minister?
Well, growing up, as I said earlier, growing up, I, liked working with the youth. I liked, going to the youth group, and I liked speaking to the youth. And as I got older, I started to, work with the youth and minister to the youth. And I just started to doing that again with the church that I
Oh, that's
go
great.
to. And the youth pastor came to me and said, "Hey, Dorsey, why don't you, become a part of the leadership with the youth group? They seem to like you. They seem to, you know, like you and whatnot. Why don't you come in and help out?" So I always liked, you know, speaking to the youth and just encouraging them. And as I got older, I started to feel, a burden for them and wanting to, be able to minister to them. And that, I just felt like that's what, I wanted to do as I got older. And I had one of the youth leaders in the youth group back, 10, probably it was about 32 years ago now or so. And he said to me, Dorsey, I see you traveling around the country sharing your story.
Right.
And that's what I've now been doing. That's what I've been doing now for the last 15 years or so. And I never really got into the youth ministry. I mean, yeah, I have a degree in the youth ministry, but I never got really going with that as far as being a youth pastor, although I am a ordained minister.
Right.
And I think I never really got into that. I think due to the fact that every time I would go on a interview to um for the youth pastor position,
Mm-hmm.
I never got past the first part of the interview. I never got really past that part. And I even had one of the youth pastors, or excuse me, one of the senior pastors say to me, Dorsey, I see you have a disability. We will not look at your disability, but we'll just look at your resume and see what see what will happen. And just coming out of Bible college, you don't really normally, even any college, you don't really have a lot of things on that resume.
Right.
So, you know, I never really, got past any part of the first interview process. So, when I got home, I started going to another church where they knew and supported me, and would encourage me to do something in ministry, and that's how I was able to share my story. And that's when I just felt like, hey, I need to, make phone calls, make contacts with churches, with, things of that nature, and see if they would allow me to come and share my story. And that's what I've been doing now for the last 15 years.
Do you have a moment when you've been doing this that has really stood out for you?
I was friends with this pastor on Facebook from California. I had no inkling of who this guy was, and he had probably had no inkling of who I was. And I just wrote to him. I was like, "Hey, this is who I am. This is what I do. Would you possibly consider having me to come out and share my story?" And probably an hour or two later, he wrote back to me. He's like, "Hey, you know, thank you for contacting me. We have a church event for people with disabilities.
I will.
Called it was with Tim Tebow and the Night to Shine event, and we'd love for you to come out that weekend. You can come out to the event, check it out, see what it's like, and not and then on that Sunday you could preach at all the services." And I was like, "Fine," and that was probably one of the biggest memories that I have of to this day. We'll see what happens down the road, but to this day of ministering and being able to see the kids and the young people, with disabilities on that dance floor dancing and just having a great time, and seeing them, being driven up in, different cars and different vehicles, and being treated like, the kings and queens of the ball for that night.
So you not only have your work that you do in the ministry and you have written your own book, but you have your own podcast. Why did you want to do that? And what are some of the topics and themes you focus on in your podcast?
Yeah, I actually guess it was about 2 years ago now. I actually was given an opportunity to share my story on someone else's podcast, and they showed me what it was like, what it's done, what needed to be done for that podcast. And I thought about it like, hey, let me try it, let me see what it's like. And I started it on Anchor, and I started interviewing people who I knew, who I thought would have a great story of inspiration and motivation. And it started to steamroll and started to build up more and more. And I think the biggest stories that I get out of it is just stories of inspiration, stories of
Right.
overcoming, stories of faith. And I need to get back to that because I started working at Target about a month ago, and that tripped me up a little bit with scheduling and
Mm-hmm.
trying to do all that I do all at the same time. So
Right.
I need to figure out when I can edit and when I can record again to get that podcast back up and running again.
So I love your life saying that I shared at the beginning that can't is not in your vocabulary. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, well, if people would get to know me, long enough, they would realize that I don't use that word can't very often, if at all, in my life. Um, whether it's with, whether it's with, different, things that they tell me to do, or um with sporting events, or with even driving a car. People ask me all the time, when I go to different events or go to, churches and whatnot, they'll ask me, well, how did you get here? I was like, well, I drove. And they're like, you drive? Like,
Right,
yeah, I
right,
drive. I'm able to drive.
right,
um, so different, different things like that, where, even with my hands and, my fingers being shortened, I'm able to go bowling. I'm able to do all these things, and I think, so if people would say to me, "Hey, why don't you, come with me and we'll go, we'll go for a walk, or we'll go, for a walk, on a rock wall, or something like that, a hike or something like that." I'm not going to tell them I can't do that. I may say to them, well, I have, limitations in
right,
how far I can walk, so I may not be able to walk as far as you can, but we'll be able to go and try it out.
right. And I guess you don't know what you can't do until you've done it to
Right,
know what
exactly.
it. So I love that motto. I'm going to keep that in my mind too, because it's great. So last question: knowing what you know now, what is one thing that you would tell your younger self?
I would tell my younger self that, I would just tell my younger self that everything will be okay.
Right,
That, you don't have to worry about what's happening in the future. Think about what's happening today,
right.
and live each day, to the best of your ability.
Well, I think that is a great way to end this episode. How can people find your book or listen to your podcast?
Yeah, you can find my book and my podcast on my website, www.dorseyrossministries.com. And if you're interested in having me to come speak on a podcast or at a event, you can contact me on there as well.
Great. So thank you, Dorsey, for sharing your journey with us. You are an inspiration to me and to many, and I really enjoyed our time together. So
Thank you,
thank
Dina. I
you.
appreciate it.
Great. So our community is lucky to have such incredible advocates like Dorsey, and I am grateful to be able to share these stories with you. Everyone has a story, and I'm hopeful that by sharing them, we can create a kinder world. For more than 70 years, myFace has been dedicated to changing the faces and transforming the lives of children and adults with facial differences by providing access to holistic, comprehensive care, education, resources, and support that pave the way for better outcomes. To learn more, please visit myface.org. If you would like to learn more about myFace support groups so that you can connect with others in the craniofacial community, please visit myface.org/online-groups. Be sure to subscribe to MyFace, MyStory on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube to get notified of our next episode. If you'd like to receive email reminders of new episodes, sign up at myface.org/mystory. That's myface.org/mystory. Thank you for joining us for this episode of My Face, My Story. Remember, it takes courage to share your story, so be brave and speak out.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Paul, the Executive Director of myFace. myFace is a nonprofit organization dedicated to changing the faces and transforming the lives of children and adults with facial differences. We do this through various programs and events such as the Transforming Lives educational webinar series, Races for Faces, the Wonder Project, and the groundbreaking myFace, myStory conversational series. You can learn more about all of these on our website at myface.org. If you enjoyed today's program, we hope you'll consider making a donation to help keep programs like this possible, as well as to further the support of the craniofacial community. Thank you.